I wasn't looking for giants when I found this photograph. I was researching architectural proportions in government buildings from the 1800s, the kind of dry academic work that puts most people to sleep. But then I stumbled across an image that made my stomach drop. A formal portrait from 1876, taken outside a courthouse in Pennsylvania. 7 men standing in a line, 4 of them normal height, 3 of them towering at what appeared to be 9, maybe 10 feet tall. And here's what disturbed me most. Nobody in the photograph looked surprised. No one was pointing, no expressions of wonder or shock. These extraordinarily tall individuals were just standing there, wearing work clothes, looking bored, like this was the most normal thing in the world. This wasn't a circus promotion. This wasn't a medical curiosity being displayed. This was a work crew. And the 3 giants were clearly in charge. The photograph was filed in a municipal archive under construction records, not oddities or curiosities. The caption was matter-of-fact. Courthouse Expansion Project, September 1876. No mention of the height difference. No explanation. No acknowledgement that anything unusual was being documented. As if photographing 9-foot-tall human beings was as routine as photographing horses or machinery. That's when I knew something was fundamentally wrong with the story we've been told about human history. Because once you see one photograph like this, you start finding dozens, 10, 100, and the pattern that emerges is so consistent, so deliberate, so globally coordinated that it becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence or misidentification. I'm going to show you evidence that's been systematically suppressed for over a century. Evidence that suggests human beings of extraordinary size weren't just occasional genetic anomalies, but a functional class of people who served specific roles in a civilization we've been taught never existed. And I'm going to show you exactly how they were removed from history, who did it, and why the evidence of their existence had to be completely erased. But first, let me show you just how much evidence there actually is. The photographic record is overwhelming once you know where to look. I found images from every continent, cabinet cards from the 1860s, showing individuals 8 to 10 feet tall standing next to family members of normal height. Tintype photographs from the 1870s documenting construction crews with multiple giants working alongside regular-sized men. Carte de visite images from the 1880s showing these individuals in formal settings, wearing suits, looking directly at the camera with the same serious expressions everyone wore in early photography. These weren't blurry, distant shots. These were professional portraits taken in studios with controlled lighting and proper equipment, the kind of photographs that required subjects to sit still for extended exposures. You can see the grain of the fabric in their clothing. You can see the texture of their skin. You can count the buttons on their vests. And you can measure their height against door frames, furniture, and the people standing next to them. The British Museum archives contain at least 17 such images, catalogued but rarely displayed. The Smithsonian mentions them in inventory records from the early 1900s, then claims those same photographs were lost during routine transfers. French national collections show similar images filed under miscellaneous or unverified, despite being properly documented with dates, locations, and photographer credits. Russian imperial archives reference persons of unusual stature serving in administrative and ceremonial roles, with supporting photographic evidence that was supposedly destroyed during the Revolution, though private collections suggest otherwise. The Australian National Library has a series of photographs from the 1880s showing construction of government buildings in Melbourne with workers of dramatically different scales. Some archives have digitized these images, but curiously, the digital versions often show cropping or processing that makes the height differences less dramatic than the original glass plates reveal. Here's what makes this evidence impossible to dismiss. These photographs span decades and continents, yet they show the same thing. Giants integrated into normal society, working regular jobs, wearing period-appropriate clothing, photographed alongside people of standard height. If these were hoaxes or photographic tricks, we'd expect to see inconsistencies, different techniques used in different regions. Progression as hoax methods improved over time, but we don't see that. We see perfect consistency from the 1850s through the early 1900s, then sudden complete cessation of such images appearing in the record. If you're seeing what I'm seeing, if these patterns are starting to disturb you, The way they disturb me, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me which detail so far has caught your attention the most, because we're about to go much deeper. And what comes next is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about the buildings you walk past every day. The photographs alone would be compelling, but they're just the beginning, because while we can debate photographic evidence, we cannot debate the physical architecture that still stands today. Buildings constructed in the 1700s and 1800s with proportions that make absolutely no sense for normal human beings. And I'm not talking about grand entrances designed for aesthetic impact. I'm talking about working corridors, back staircases, administrative offices, the functional spaces where people spent their days. Spaces with doorways 12 to 15 feet high where no aesthetic grandeur is needed. Staircases with risers so tall a normal person has to stretch to climb them comfortably. Hallways with ceiling heights that create absurd proportions for anyone under 7 feet. I started measuring these features systematically. Courthouses across America built between 1820 and 1890. Government buildings throughout Europe from the same period, administrative complexes in Russia, India, South America. The pattern repeats with disturbing precision. Interior doorways in working areas, not ceremonial spaces, measuring 11 to 14 feet high. Staircases with 12-inch risers instead of the 7 to 8 inches that accommodate normal human gait. Furniture found in estate sales and museum storage. Desks and chairs and beds, all scaled approximately 30 to 40% larger than standard human proportions. Not one building, not one region, thousands of structures across every continent, all built in the same narrow window of time, all featuring the same excessive proportions. The standard explanation is that these features represent decorative, excess, or period aesthetic preferences, but that explanation collapses under examination, because decorative excess appears in public-facing areas, in grand entrances and ceremonial halls. It doesn't appear in back corridors and administrative offices and storage rooms. You don't add 30% to the cost of a building, 30% to the heating requirements, 30% to the construction time and labor, just for aesthetic effect, in areas the public never sees, unless those areas were designed for people who actually needed those proportions, people who would find a 12-foot doorway comfortable and a standard 7-foot doorway awkwardly low. Look at the courthouse buildings across the American Midwest, built between 1850 and 1890. County seats in small towns with populations of 3,000 to 5,000 people. These weren't wealthy metropolitan centers. These were modest agricultural communities, yet their government buildings feature interior proportions suited for people 8 to 9 feet tall. The judges' chambers with 14-foot ceilings. The administrative offices with oversized desks and chairs. The holding cells with bars spaced wide enough that a normal person could slip through, but which would contain someone of substantially larger build. Why would a town of 4,000 people struggling to fund basic services spend the equivalent of millions in today's dollars to build government facilities, scaled for giants? Unless giants were actually using those facilities, the pattern extends beyond government buildings. I found similar proportions in industrial structures from the same period, factories with doorways and ceiling heights far exceeding functional requirements, railway stations with ticket windows positioned at heights that force normal humans to reach up awkwardly, custom houses and administrative buildings at ports, warehouses with loading dock features sized for workers of exceptional height and strength. All of this concentrated in the same historical window, all of it appearing across widely separated geographical regions, all of it dismissed as architectural eccentricity, despite the obvious impracticality and expense. And then there are the tools, objects that should not exist if human workers averaged 5'6" to 5'10", as historical records claim. I'm talking about wrenches measuring 4 to 6 feet in length, found in demolition sites across Europe and North America, not decorative pieces. Functional tools, with wear patterns showing actual use. Tools designed for hands substantially larger than ours. Museums categorize them as industrial equipment without explaining what industrial process would require a wrench weighing 200 pounds that demands the grip strength of multiple normal men to operate. Auction houses sell them as curiosities, without asking why they appear so frequently in estate sales and building demolitions more than a century after they were supposedly manufactured. I found hammers with handles 4 feet long and heads weighing 60 to 80 pounds. Axes scaled proportionally larger than standard tools. Specialized construction implements that make sense only if operated by someone 8 to 10 feet tall with proportional strength. These weren't ceremonial objects. They show the scratches and dents of regular use. They were working tools for working people, people who no longer exist in our historical record, but whose equipment keeps surfacing, keeps being filed away as anomalies, keeps being explained away as special purpose tools, despite no documentation of what that special purpose might have been. The furniture is perhaps most disturbing because it appears in domestic contexts. Chairs found in estate auctions with seat heights of 30 to 36 inches, nearly double the standard 18 inches that accommodates normal human leg length. Not thrones, not ceremonial pieces designed to intimidate. Ordinary dining chairs, desk chairs, sitting chairs meant for daily use. The backrests tower 7, sometimes 8 feet high. The armrests positioned at heights that would leave an average person's arms dangling uselessly. Beds measuring 9 to 10 feet long found in private homes. Dining tables with surfaces 40 to 42 inches high instead of the standard 30 inches. All of this dismissed as Victorian decorative excess. As if wealthy people in the 1800s routinely commissioned furniture they physically could not use just for the aesthetic statement. Subscribe now and leave a comment. If you've ever seen these architectural features yourself and wondered why they seemed so impractical, because what I'm about to show you explains not just why these buildings were built this way, but who they were built for and what role those individuals played in a civilization that has been systematically erased from history. The pieces start coming together when you examine not just the scale but the function of these structures and the individuals who occupied them. The photographs show giants consistently in specific contexts: administrative roles, supervisory positions, security and oversight functions. You see them standing guard at government buildings. You see them overseeing construction sites. You see them in formal portraits suggesting official or ceremonial importance. They're not shown as laborers or craftsmen or merchants. They're shown as administrators, overseers, guardians. And that's the word that keeps appearing in period documents that mention them at all. Guardians. Russian imperial documents from the early 1800s referenced guardians of state facilities with unusual physical characteristics. French administrative records mention overseers of exceptional stature assigned to public works projects. British colonial records describe supervisory personnel of remarkable height managing infrastructure in India and Australia. The language is always careful, always vague, but the implication is consistent. These individuals held positions of authority specifically related to infrastructure, construction, and the maintenance of large-scale architectural systems. They weren't rulers or aristocrats. They were a functional class, a specialized workforce employed for purposes that required their unique physical capabilities. This is where Tartaria becomes impossible to ignore. If you're not familiar, Tartaria appears on maps from the 1700s and early 1800s as a vast territory spanning much of northern Asia. Not a legend, not a speculative region, an actual labeled territory appearing in encyclopedias and geographical records with the same casual certainty as France or Spain or the Ottoman Empire. Then, sometime in the mid-1800s, it vanishes, not conquered and renamed, not gradually absorbed into neighboring empires. Erased. The maps are redrawn. The encyclopedias stop mentioning it. The historical record acts as if it never existed. But the architecture remains. Massive stone structures across Central Asia, Russia, Mongolia, Siberia. Buildings of extraordinary scale and precision, constructed with techniques we still cannot fully explain using the technology supposedly available in their era of construction. Buildings with those same oversized proportions. Doorways sized for giants. Halls that echo with vastness. Administrative complexes, religious structures, civic buildings, all featuring the architectural signatures we've been documenting, all supposedly built by various empires or local populations, with no proper documentation, no verified construction records, no coherent explanation for how such engineering was achieved. What if the giants weren't anomalies at all? What if they were the administrative class? The overseers, the guardians of Tartarian infrastructure. What if that's why the architecture is scaled the way it is? Because the people responsible for maintaining it, operating it, overseeing its functions were physically larger than the general population. It would explain why government buildings, courthouses, administrative centers, structures of oversight and control feature these proportions, while residential areas remain scaled for normal humans. It would explain why the photographs always show giants in formal, official contexts rather than domestic settings. It would explain why historical records mention them in supervisory roles, but rarely as common workers or artisans. And it would explain the construction mysteries that have puzzled researchers for decades. How were massive stone structures built with such precision in the 1700s and 1800s? Maybe they weren't built by the civilizations we credit them to. Maybe they were built by or for a previous society, maintained by a specialized class of physically imposing individuals who could move stones, operate machinery, and oversee construction at scales we consider impossible for the tools allegedly available. The engineering becomes less mysterious if you assume some of the engineers stood 9 feet tall with proportional strength and reach. But here's where the evidence becomes truly disturbing. Because these giants didn't just fade away gradually through natural population decline. They disappeared suddenly and completely from the historical record in a very specific time frame. The photographs stop appearing after approximately 1900. The newspaper reports of giant skeleton discoveries, which were common throughout the late 1800s, cease after 1920. The administrative records that mention overseers of unusual stature go silent, and this disappearance coincides almost perfectly with other patterns we've documented in this series. The burial of Old World architecture under meters of sediment, the mud flood events that transformed first floors into basements across multiple continents, the systematic rewriting of construction dates and architectural attribution, all of it happening in the same narrow window of time. The New York Times in 1885 reported discovery of a 7-foot skeleton in a Michigan burial mound. The San Diego Union in 1895 documented bones of extraordinary size found during railroad excavation. The Middletown Signal in 1899 described giant human remains uncovered in Ohio. These weren't sensational tabloid stories. These were mainstream newspapers reporting discoveries that were at the time considered newsworthy, but not particularly controversial. The accounts describe skeletons measuring 7 to 12 feet in length, often found in organized burial sites, frequently accompanied by artifacts suggesting advanced metallurgical knowledge and sophisticated construction techniques. Then, after approximately 1920, these reports stop, not gradually, abruptly. Discoveries that were once front-page news simply cease to appear in the record. The skeletons already found, many of them sent to the Smithsonian Institution for further study and cataloging. The Smithsonian now claims no such specimens exist in their collections. Missing, lost, misplaced during routine transfers. Hundreds of skeletal remains, all vanished without proper documentation. When pressed, the institution suggests these were misidentified mastodon bones, or exaggerated accounts of normal human remains. But the original reports specify human skeletal structure. They describe human skulls, human femurs, human dental patterns, just scaled significantly larger than modern averages. The pattern of disappearance is too coordinated to be accidental. Physical evidence sent to museums and universities, lost. Photographic evidence archived in municipal collections, damaged or missing specifically in sections showing scale comparisons. Historical records mentioning individuals of unusual stature, removed from updated editions of local histories. Patents and technical documents related to construction techniques suitable for large-scale workers, destroyed in convenient fires or reclassified under restrictions that remain active today. This wasn't gradual obsolescence or natural archival decay. This was systematic removal. I found something in the archives that made everything click into place. Municipal meeting minutes from 1911 and 1912 in cities across North America and Europe. The language is careful, deliberately vague, but the resolutions are clear. Cessation of certain administrative programs, removal of specialized personnel from public facilities, discontinuation of oversight arrangements that had been in place for decades. The meetings never specify what's being discontinued or who's being removed, but they all happen in the same 18-month period across cities separated by thousands of miles, as if instructions came from a coordinating authority that officially did not exist. If you're starting to see how deep this goes, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because I'm about to show you exactly who coordinated this erasure and what they were trying to hide. And understanding this changes everything about how we interpret the world we've inherited. By 1913, something fundamental had changed. The photographs of giants stop appearing. The newspaper reports of skeleton discoveries cease. New government buildings constructed after this date use standard human proportions, even when built in the exact same architectural style as earlier oversized structures. Cities that had employed specialized overseers for infrastructure suddenly managed those same systems with normal-height administrators. The transition happened too quickly, too uniformly, too globally coordinated to be natural. This was planned. This was executed. This was enforced. And here's what disturbs me most. It's not just that the giants disappeared, it's that the knowledge they protected disappeared with them. Look at what we lost in that same period. The free energy systems built into Tartarian architecture stopped functioning or were deliberately disabled. The atmospheric electricity collection that those massive buildings facilitated, gone. The harmonic resonance chambers that served purposes we still don't fully understand, sealed or demolished. The sophisticated water and air circulation systems, abandoned. Within a single generation, humanity went from maintaining advanced architectural technology to treating those same structures as mere decorative buildings. Beautiful, but functionless. What if the giants weren't just overseers? What if they were the living connection to operational knowledge? The kind of understanding that can't be written in manuals, that requires physical demonstration, that demands embodied expertise passed from master to apprentice through direct training, knowledge of how to activate the resonance chambers, how to tune the atmospheric collectors, how to maintain the energy distribution networks built into the architecture itself. When they were removed, that knowledge died with them, and we've been living in the shells of their technology ever since, admiring the buildings without understanding what they were really for. The evidence suggests their removal was surgical and complete. No gradual decline, no documented epidemic or conflict that would explain a population collapse. Just coordinated elimination followed by systematic erasure from historical memory. The same period that saw mud flood events, bury old world architecture, saw the physical removal of the beings who understood that architecture. The same authorities that rewrote construction dates and architectural attribution also removed all reference to the specialized class who had maintained those structures. It's not two separate mysteries, it's one coordinated operation. Census records from this period show strange anomalies. Whole categories of occupation disappear between the 1890 and 1920 census cycles. Infrastructure oversight, atmospheric facility maintenance, resonance chamber operation, positions that appear in earlier records simply don't exist in later counts. Not reduced in number, eliminated entirely from the classification system. As if the jobs themselves had never existed. Hospital records show gaps for the same period. Years where certain types of medical documentation simply aren't created. Not destroyed in fires, never created in the first place, or created and systematically removed later. The deeper I look, the more obvious the coordination becomes. This wasn't random loss or accidental forgetting. Someone decided the giants needed to be erased from history. Someone had the authority to coordinate that erasure across continents, across national boundaries, across competing empires and political systems. Someone possessed the resources to systematically remove physical evidence, suppress photographic records, rewrite official histories, and enforce silence across multiple generations. That level of coordination suggests power structures operating above the level of individual nations. Structures that officially have never existed, but whose fingerprints are all over the historical record once you know what to look for. I keep coming back to a simple question. Why go to such extraordinary lengths to erase evidence of human biological diversity? Why systematically remove proof that some people were physically larger and apparently served specific societal functions? Unless their existence proved something that threatened a new order. Unless acknowledging them meant acknowledging the civilization they served. Unless admitting they were real meant admitting we didn't build what we inherited. We just occupied it after its original administrators were removed. The buildings stand as testimony to what we've forgotten. Walk into any courthouse built between 1820 and 1890 and look up. Really? Look. See how the proportions don't quite work for normal humans? See how the architectural details are positioned for sightlines 8 or 9 feet off the ground. See how the functional elements, the door handles, the window latches, the built-in furniture, all of it scaled just wrong for standard human dimensions. We've adapted these spaces, added platforms and step stools, modified the furniture, convinced ourselves the original builders just had eccentric taste. But the truth is simpler and more disturbing. These spaces weren't built for us. They were built for the Guardians. And the Guardians are gone. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see where this investigation goes next, because I've found documents that name the organizations involved in this erasure, and when you see who they are and what they became, everything about the modern world starts making terrible sense. What happened to the giants themselves? Were they eliminated? Relocated? Absorbed into hidden populations we're not allowed to know about? The historical record offers no answers because the historical record has been scrubbed. But the evidence of their existence persists in the architecture we use daily, in the photographs that weren't successfully destroyed, in the tools and furniture that keep appearing in estate sales and demolitions. Physical proof that survives, despite every attempt to erase it. We live in the remnants of their world. We work in buildings they maintained. We walk through doorways, scaled for their height. We look at architectural features, designed for their sightlines. And we tell ourselves stories about Victorian excess and decorative grandeur, because the truth is too unsettling to acknowledge that we didn't build this civilization, we inherited it. That the beings who understood it were systematically removed. That we're technological orphans using equipment we don't fully comprehend. Living in structures whose original purpose we've forgotten. The photographs remained filed in archives, marked miscellaneous or The buildings stand, repurposed, and misunderstood. The tools surfaced occasionally, catalogued as curiosities. The evidence persists, waiting for someone willing to ask the forbidden questions. Who were the giants? Why did they disappear? What knowledge died with them? And who benefited from their erasure? I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure anyone does. But the questions themselves matter, because asking them means acknowledging we've been lied to about our history, means recognizing that the official narrative has holes large enough to fit 9-foot-tall human beings who apparently never existed despite overwhelming evidence. They did means accepting that the world we've inherited is more mysterious, more technologically sophisticated, more deliberately obscured than we've been taught to believe. The Guardians are gone. The civilization they protected has been buried and forgotten, and we're left with fragments, with architectural mysteries we dismiss as eccentricities, with photographic evidence we're trained to doubt, with physical remains that major institutions claim never existed despite documentation proving otherwise. The absence itself is evidence. A hole in history shaped exactly like the truth we're not supposed to remember. And that absence, that vast echoing void where the giants should be, speaks louder than any surviving record, because you can erase documents and destroy photographs and lose skeletal evidence, but you can't erase the buildings. You can't unmake the doorways, or lower the ceilings, or rescale the furniture. The architecture remains permanent testimony to who they were and what we've lost. Walk into those spaces. Stand beneath those impossible proportions. Feel how wrong they are for normal human scale, and then ask yourself why we've agreed to pretend they make perfect sense.